the town appears first as a whisper of smoke against the Pennsylvania sky. Farmland stretches in every direction, broken only by the single road that cuts through fields of corn and wheat. The year is 1903. In the distance, beyond the gentle hills, a structure rises. Brick by brick, steel beam by steel beam, a factory taking shape where nothing stood before. Milton Hershey stands at the construction site, his coat dusted with Pennsylvania soil. He is 46 years old. Behind him lies a trail of failures that would have destroyed lesser men. Ahead of him, a vision so audacious that bankers laugh when he describes it. He wants to build the largest chocolate factory in the world, not in a city, not near ports or railroads or centers of commerce. Here, in the middle of nowhere, on the land where he was born. The workers move through the framework like ants constructing a cathedral. They don't know yet what they're building. They don't know that this factory will one day produce more chocolate than any place on earth. They don't know that the town growing around it will bear one man's name for over a century. They only know the work, the wages, the promise of something permanent in a world that offers little permanence to men who labor with their hands. Milton Hershey learned failure early. His father was a dreamer who chased schemes that never materialized, a man who moved his family from place to place, always certain the next venture would bring fortune. Milton watched his mother's face grow tired, watched her hands work while his father talked. By the time he was 14, Milton was apprenticed to a printer. He lasted 4 days. Then came the candy shop in Philadelphia, where he learned to make caramels from a man who understood sugar and heat and timing. 4 years of learning, then his own shop, then bankruptcy. He tried again in Chicago, failed again, tried in New Orleans, failed, tried in New York, failed so completely he had to borrow money for the train fare home. 4 failures before the age of 30. Most men would have stopped. Milton Hershey was not most men. In 1886, he returned to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, with borrowed equipment and a recipe for caramel that he'd perfected through all those failures. The Lancaster Caramel Company. This time, something shifted. The caramels sold. Then, sold more. Within a decade, he employed over 1,000 workers. The factory ran day and night. Milton Hershey became wealthy, respectably wealthy, the kind of wealthy that should have satisfied any man who'd known hunger and failure. But in 1893, he attended the Chicago World's Fair. In the German pavilion, he saw chocolate-making equipment, massive machines that could process cocoa beans into chocolate on an industrial scale. He watched the gears turn, watched the chocolate flow, and something ignited in his mind. America consumed chocolate, but it was a luxury. European, expensive. Only the wealthy could afford it regularly. Milton Hershey saw possibility in that gap between desire and access. He bought the machines, had them shipped to Lancaster, started experimenting. His caramel business was thriving, but he began spending more time with chocolate, testing recipes, adjusting ratios of milk to cocoa. Most American chocolate at the time was dark and bitter. Europeans had developed milk chocolate, but the process was closely guarded. Swiss chocolatiers dominated the market. Milton Hershey had no formal training in chocolate making. He simply had obsession and the resources to pursue it. For years he experimented. The caramel business paid for his chocolate trials. Workers who arrived to make caramel found their employer covered in cocoa powder, adjusting temperatures on vats of chocolate that often failed. Too grainy, too bitter, too sweet. The milk spoiled before it could be properly incorporated. Each failure taught him something. Each adjustment brought him closer. In 1900, he sold the Lancaster Caramel Company for $1 million, a fortune by any measure. He kept the chocolate manufacturing equipment. His lawyers thought he was mad. His business partners thought he was throwing away security for a gamble. He was 53 years old. Most men that age who'd finally achieved wealth would protect it. Milton Hershey took his $1 million and bet everything on chocolate. He returned to Derry Township, the place of his birth. Land his family had worked for generations. He could have built his chocolate factory anywhere. Philadelphia had infrastructure. New York had markets. Pittsburgh had steel and rail connections. He chose farmland in central Pennsylvania. When asked why, his answer was simple: fresh milk, lots of it. close to the source. The factory began as a foundation, then walls, then the massive machinery shipped from Germany and Switzerland. Local farmers who'd sold him their land now watched a complex rise from the earth. The buildings stretched across acres, multiple stories of brick and steel and glass, windows that caught the morning light, smokestacks that would soon pour the smell of chocolate over fields that once grew only corn. But a factory alone wasn't enough. Milton Hershey understood something that other industrialists of his era either ignored or exploited. Workers needed to live somewhere. If he wanted the best workers, he needed to build them a town. Not tenements, not slums, a real town, with houses and schools and parks, with electricity and running water, with everything that would make men want to stay. The town rose alongside the factory, streets laid out in a grid, houses built in styles that varied just enough to avoid monotony. Not mansions, but solid homes with yards and porches, a bank, a department store, a public library, a school system that would become among the finest in Pennsylvania, street lights, paved roads, everything planned, everything controlled. By 1905, the factory was operational. The first Hershey chocolate bars rolled off the production line. They were simple. Milk chocolate, nothing fancy, no European sophistication, just sweet, creamy chocolate that tasted like something new. Milton Hershey priced them low, 5 cents, affordable for working people, for children, for anyone who wanted a moment of sweetness in a hard world. The bars sold, then sold more, then couldn't be produced fast enough. Americans who thought of chocolate as a luxury discovered they could afford it. Mothers bought bars for their children. Workers bought them for quick energy. The taste wasn't refined like European chocolate. It was distinctly American. Sweeter, simpler, democratic in its affordability. The factory expanded. New production lines, new equipment. The workforce grew from hundreds to thousands. Men came from surrounding counties looking for work. Immigrants arrived from Europe hearing of steady wages and a company town that treated workers well. By the standards of 1905, Hershey was progressive. Workers had clean facilities. The company provided housing at reasonable rates. There were recreation programs and educational opportunities. Milton Hershey walked through his factory daily. He knew the machinery, knew the workers by name. He'd spent his youth failing, and those failures taught him that nothing came from cruelty or exploitation. Success came from efficiency, quality, and keeping good people. His workers weren't just labor. They were the foundation of his empire. But empire is the right word, because what Milton Hershey built was more than a factory or a town. It was a complete system, a world unto itself. He owned the land, the factory, the houses, the stores, the bank, the utilities. Every aspect of life in Hershey, Pennsylvania flowed from and through one man's vision. For workers, this meant security. For Milton Hershey, it meant control. The chocolate bars were just the beginning. Hershey's Kisses launched in 1907, small teardropped pieces of chocolate wrapped in foil. They became iconic almost immediately. The machinery that produced them was custom built, each kiss perfectly formed, each one wrapped by workers whose hands moved with practiced precision. The factory floor hummed with production. The smell of chocolate became the smell of prosperity. Milton Hershey married Catherine Sweeney in 1898. She was a gentlewoman, reserved. They had no children. Catherine devoted herself to her husband's vision. She supported the town's development, helped establish programs for workers' families, but her health was fragile. She suffered from a degenerative muscular disease that worsened over the years. Milton watched his wife slowly diminish. All his wealth couldn't stop it. All his control over his empire meant nothing against the progression of her illness. In 1915, Catherine Hershey died. Milton was 58. The factory ran at full capacity. The town thrived. His fortune grew daily. But the house he built for Catherine, the mansion overlooking the factory and town, became a mausoleum. He lived there alone, walked its halls alone, ate dinner alone at a table built for entertaining. Grief changes men in different ways. Some withdraw, some self-destruct. Milton Hershey built 3 years before Catherine's death, they had established the Hershey Industrial School for orphan boys. It was Catherine's idea initially, a way to help children who had nothing. After her death, Milton poured himself into the school. He gave it more land, more resources. In 1918, he did something unprecedented. He transferred the majority of his fortune to a trust for the school, his entire stake in the Hershey Chocolate Company, control of the factory, control of the town, all of it placed in a trust designed to fund an orphanage. The legal documents stunned lawyers and business partners. One man's grief transformed into the largest private educational endowment in America. The Hershey Trust would control the factory, the profits would fund the school. Milton retained some authority during his life, but the structure was clear. The chocolate empire existed to support orphan children. It was an act of extraordinary philanthropy. It was also an act of extraordinary control. The trust controlled everything. The school's board controlled the trust. Milton Hershey controlled the board. The circular nature of power remained intact, just redirected through legal structures. The town, the factory, the workers, the school, all of it connected, all of it flowing from one source. The school grew. Dozens of boys became hundreds. They lived on campus, worked on the farms that surrounded the school, learned trades. The school was free. The boys were given everything: education, clothing, food, medical care. In exchange, they followed rules, strict rules. The boys wore uniforms, marched in formation, attended chapel, worked the fields. It was discipline, structure. Everything Milton Hershey believed made strong men, but there was something else underneath. The school only accepted white boys. This wasn't unusual for 1918. Most institutions were segregated, but the Hershey School maintained racial restrictions for decades longer than most. Through the 1960s, applications from black children were rejected automatically. The trust maintained that the school was private, that it could choose its students. That integration would undermine the school's mission. The courts eventually forced integration. In 1968, the school admitted its first black student, not because the trust wanted to, because legal and social pressure made continued segregation impossible. The school's defenders argued it was simply following the norms of its time. Its critics pointed out that many institutions had changed much earlier. That wealth and power should have meant leadership, not resistance. This contradiction ran through everything Hershey built. Progressive labor practices existed alongside paternalistic control. Generous philanthropy existed alongside strict exclusion. The town offered opportunity but demanded conformity. The factory provided wages but owned the houses workers lived in. Milton Hershey created something genuinely remarkable and something deeply troubling, often at the same time. Often in the same time. The 1920s brought massive expansion. Americans had more money. Chocolate consumption soared. The factory ran multiple shifts. New buildings rose on the campus. The town grew beyond the original grid. A sports arena, a community center, a hotel that rivaled anything in Philadelphia. Milton Hershey's vision of a model town materialized in brick and stone, but the workforce told a different story. Efficiency meant speed. Speed meant pressure. The production lines ran faster each year. Workers who couldn't keep pace were replaced. Injuries happened. Burns from chocolate kept at high temperatures, crushed fingers from machinery. The company provided medical care, but medical care didn't prevent the next injury. Safety improvements came slowly. Production targets came constantly. The town's population swelled. Housing couldn't keep up. Workers who couldn't get company housing rented rooms in private homes, lived in boarding houses. Some commuted from nearby towns. The ideal of every worker in a company house faded. The reality became more complex, more typical of industrial America, less like the utopia Milton Hershey envisioned. In 1927, Milton Hershey announced plans for a new project, a luxury hotel that would make Hershey a destination resort. The Hotel Hershey would sit on a hill overlooking the town and factory. It would be grand. Spanish colonial revival architecture, fountains, gardens, a golf course, nothing modest, nothing practical, pure ambition. The Great Depression hit before construction finished. The hotel opened in 1933. With the country in economic collapse, unemployment reached 25%, banks failed daily, factories closed. But the Hotel Hershey opened its doors to wealthy guests who could still afford luxury. Visitors came to play golf and swim and eat fine meals while the surrounding countryside struggled. Milton Hershey had a different calculation. The hotel provided jobs during the Depression. Construction employed hundreds, operation employed hundreds more. While other companies laid off workers, Hershey hired. He commissioned new buildings, expanded the sports arena into a grand stadium, put men to work when work was scarce. His defenders saw this as humanitarian. His critics saw calculated self-interest. Keeping workers employed meant keeping them loyal. Preventing desperation meant preventing unrest. The answer was probably both. Milton Hershey was not a simple man. His motivations were not pure charity or pure exploitation. They were the complex mixture of a man who'd known poverty and achieved power, who remembered hunger and now controlled the food source. The Depression revealed other tensions. Workers who'd accepted company control during prosperity chafed under it during hardship. Wages were steady but didn't rise. Prices in company stores stayed high. The company owned everything, which meant workers had limited options. The benevolent paternalism of the boom years felt more constraining when times got hard. In 1937, the tension exploded. Workers at the Hershey factory went on strike. Not all of them, but enough to shut down production lines. Their demands were clear: union recognition, collective bargaining, better wages, improved conditions. The same demands workers across America were making as unions gained power under New Deal labor laws. Milton Hershey was 80 years old. He built this empire, provided jobs when others failed, created a town, funded a school. He saw the strike as betrayal. In gratitude, he'd given these workers everything. Now they demanded more. The strike lasted 6 days. It didn't end through negotiation. It ended through violence. Farmers from the surrounding area, many of whom supply milk to the factory, broke the strike. They came with clubs, with anger. They believed the strikers were threatening their livelihoods. The dairy farmers depended on the factory. No factory meant no market for milk. The violence was brief but brutal. Strikers were beaten. The strike collapsed. The factory reopened. But something broke that couldn't be repaired: the illusion of mutual interest. The idea that the company and workers were one family. After 1937, everyone understood the reality. The factory was a business. Workers were labor. When interests diverged, power decided the outcome. Milton Hershey never acknowledged the strike as legitimate. He died in 1945 at 88 years old. By then, his factory was producing chocolate for Allied soldiers, Hershey's tropical bars that could withstand jungle heat, rations that kept American troops supplied with quick energy. The war made the Hershey Company essential to the national interest, made it untouchable. His funeral was attended by thousands: workers, town residents, orphans from the school. The man who'd built an empire was mourned as a benefactor. The newspapers praised his philanthropy, his vision, his contribution to American industry and childhood alike. The complications were set aside, the contradictions ignored. History prefers simple narratives. Milton Hershey became a simple hero, but the empire he left behind was anything but simple. The trust controlled billions of dollars in assets. The school educated thousands of boys. The factory produced millions of chocolate bars daily. The town bore his name. His legacy was everywhere, and everywhere it was contested. The decades after Milton Hershey's death transformed the chocolate empire in ways its founder never anticipated. The trust that controlled everything became one of the wealthiest private institutions in America. The school Milton built for orphans evolved into something far more complex. The factory that once employed thousands of local workers gradually automated, mechanized, eliminated the human hands that had shaped chocolate for generations. By 1960, the Hershey factory was producing more chocolate than ever before. New products launched constantly. Reese's Peanut Butter Cups, acquired from another company. Kit Kat, licensed from British manufacturers. The simple milk chocolate bar that built the empire became just one product among dozens. Marketing became as important as manufacturing. The Hershey brand wasn't just chocolate anymore. It was childhood, Americana, nostalgia. But the town of Hershey, Pennsylvania was changing too. The tidy company town of the early 20th century had grown into a tourist destination. Hershey Park, which started as a simple picnic ground for workers, expanded into a full amusement park. Roller coasters rose where workers once gathered for company picnics. The park attracted visitors from across the East Coast. Families came to ride the rides and tour the factory and buy chocolate souvenirs. The factory tours became legendary. Visitors walked through observation galleries above the production floor, watched chocolate being mixed, molded, wrapped, packaged. The smell of cocoa filled the air. Children pressed their faces against the glass, watching chocolate rivers flow through industrial equipment. It was magical, industrial magic, the kind that made people forget that what they were watching was labor, machinery, economic production. In 1963, the Hershey Company went public. The trust maintained controlling interest, but now outside shareholders owned pieces of the empire. This changed everything. Public companies have obligations to shareholders. Quarterly earnings, stock prices, growth. The benevolent paternalism of Milton Hershey's era couldn't survive Wall Street expectations. Efficiency meant cost-cutting. Modernization meant automation. Progress meant eliminating workers. The workforce that had once numbered in the thousands began to shrink. Machines wrapped kisses faster than human hands. Automated systems mixed chocolate more consistently than skilled workers. The jobs that remained required less skill, paid less, offered less security. The company still existed in Hershey, Pennsylvania, but it was becoming untethered from the place, from the people, becoming just another corporation. Through all this, the Hershey Trust grew richer. The company's success meant enormous profits flowing into the trust. The trust's sole purpose was funding the Milton Hershey School. By the 1980s, the school had an endowment worth billions of dollars to educate roughly 2,000 students, the wealthiest school in America per student, possibly in the world. This created a strange situation. The school had more money than it could reasonably spend on education. The trust's board controlled vast wealth with limited accountability. The school served orphans and children from low-income families, but its endowment made it richer than elite universities. Questions emerged. What was the money for? Why accumulate billions if the mission was educating children? Why not expand? Help more children. The trust defenders argued they were following Milton Hershey's instructions. Conservative management, long-term thinking. The critics saw institutional preservation, an organization that existed to perpetuate itself. The school itself remained controversial. It was free. It provided everything for students, but it also exerted total control. Children who attended Milton Hershey School lived on campus year-round, saw their families on scheduled visits, followed strict rules about appearance, behavior, conduct. The school described this as structure. Critics called it institutional control that replicated the paternalism of the factory town. And the school still struggled with inclusion. After forced racial integration in 1968, the school remained predominantly white for decades. Applications from minority families were often rejected, not officially because of race, because families didn't meet certain criteria, because students didn't fit the school's culture. The mechanisms were subtler than outright exclusion, but the result was similar. A school founded on helping the poor that somehow helped mostly white poor children. In 2002, the school rejected a student with HIV. A 13-year-old boy who was otherwise eligible. The school claimed it couldn't safely accommodate him, that other students might be at risk. The case went to federal court. The school lost. The courts found discrimination, ruled the school violated the Americans with Disabilities Act. The school was forced to admit the student and revise its policies. This case revealed something about the institution Milton Hershey created. It was private enough to resist oversight, but public enough to receive government benefits. It claimed the moral authority of helping children, but exercised the power of exclusion. It held billions in wealth, but fought to avoid accountability for how that wealth was used. The trust's management of the Hershey Company also raised questions. In 2002, the trust announced plans to sell the Hershey Company. After nearly a century, the trust wanted to diversify. Selling Hershey would generate billions that could be invested more broadly. From a financial perspective, it made sense. One asset, no matter how valuable, represented risk. The announcement triggered fury. Residents of Hershey, Pennsylvania protested. Workers feared what new ownership would mean. The state attorney general intervened, questioning whether the sale served the trust's charitable mission or just its investment portfolio. Local politicians threatened legislation. The backlash was fierce and immediate. The trust backed down, withdrew the sale plans. The Hershey Company remained under trust control. But the incident revealed the fragility of Milton Hershey's vision. The trust had the legal right to sell. The company's connection to the town was sentimental, not structural. If future boards decided to sell, if financial pressure mounted, nothing truly protected Hershey, Pennsylvania from losing the company that built it. Meanwhile, the chocolate industry was globalizing. Hershey competed with Mars, Nestle, European manufacturers. The cocoa beans came from West Africa, Ghana, Ivory Coast, places where child labor harvested the raw material for American chocolate. Reports emerged of children working in dangerous conditions, exposed to pesticides, denied education, working debt bondage on cocoa plantations. Hershey, like other chocolate companies, faced pressure to address the supply chain. The company made commitments, pledged to source sustainable cocoa, invested in certification programs, but the fundamental economics remained unchanged. Cocoa farmers lived in poverty while chocolate companies generated billions. The children harvesting cocoa beans couldn't afford the chocolate bars they made possible. This contradiction wasn't unique to Hershey. The entire chocolate industry rested on it. But for a company built on the image of wholesome childhood, founded by a man who created a school for children, the contrast was particularly sharp. American children eating chocolate harvested by African children who would never taste it. Billions flowing to a trust meant to help orphans while orphans worked cocoa plantations. The company's responses evolved. More commitments, more programs, more certifications. Some represented genuine improvement, better pay for some farmers, schooling for some children. But the scale of the problem dwarfed the solutions. Millions of people depended on cocoa farming. Changing an entire industry's economics required more than corporate social responsibility programs. Back in Hershey, Pennsylvania, the 21st century brought new challenges. The factory still operated but employed far fewer workers. Many production processes had moved elsewhere, to facilities in different states, different countries. The iconic factory building remained, but it was increasingly a museum, a tourist attraction. The real manufacturing happened in places less romantic, less tied to the Hershey story. The town adapted. It leaned into tourism. Hershey Park expanded continuously. New rides, new attractions. The town developed restaurants and hotels and entertainment venues. Hershey became a destination. People came for the park, the chocolate, the brand experience. They didn't necessarily come for chocolate manufacturing. That part was fading, becoming history. The Milton Hershey School continued educating students. The programs improved in many ways: more diverse student body, better facilities, wider range of opportunities. But questions persisted about the model, whether institutional care was best for children, whether the school's rules about family contact served students or the institution, whether billions in endowment should support 2,000 students or be used more broadly. In 2016, former students filed lawsuits alleging abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, claims spanning decades. The school denied systematic problems, argued that any abuse was the action of individuals, not institutional failure. Settlements were reached, policies were changed, but the accusations opened wounds, forced examination of what happened behind the school's walls during years when it operated with minimal outside oversight. The trust that controlled everything faced its own controversies. Board members were paid enormous salaries, millions of dollars annually to oversee a charitable trust. The justification was that managing billions required top talent, that the trust's board positions were equivalent to corporate board seats. Critics argued that charitable trusts shouldn't enrich their boards. That money meant for orphans was going to already wealthy board members. Pennsylvania's Attorney General investigated, found conflicts of interest, board members doing business with the trust, excessive compensation, Lack of transparency. Some board members resigned, reforms were implemented, but the basic structure remained. Enormous wealth controlled by a small group with limited accountability. The Hershey Company itself faced modern pressures. Health concerns about sugar, obesity. The chocolate bar that was once affordable pleasure became dietary villain. Sales declined in certain categories. The company adapted. Acquired brands outside traditional chocolate, diversified into snacks, but the core identity remained tied to chocolate, to sweetness, to childhood. And that childhood connection became more complicated. Parents worried about sugar content, about additives, about corporate marketing to children. The innocent pleasure of a Hershey bar carried baggage now, concerns about health, ethics, sustainability. The simple transaction of buying chocolate for a child became fraught with considerations Milton Hershey never imagined. The factory tours that once showed real production became simulations. Hershey's Chocolate World, built in 1973, replaced factory tours with a ride. Visitors sat in cars that moved through a manufactured experience. Fake cows. Recorded narration. Displays showing chocolate production without showing actual workers or machinery. It was safer, cleaner, more controlled, also more dishonest. A theme park version of industrial production. Yet people loved it. Millions visited. Children rode the ride and believed they'd seen how chocolate was made. Adults purchased chocolate in the massive gift shop. The experience felt authentic enough. The distance between performance and reality didn't matter. What mattered was the feeling, the nostalgia, the brand. This was Milton Hershey's ultimate achievement, not just building a chocolate company, building a story, an identity. Hershey wasn't just chocolate, it was American childhood, small-town values, benevolent capitalism. The story survived even when the reality changed, even when the factory employed fewer workers, when production moved away, when the company became just another corporation. The story remained. But stories have limits. The children who worked cocoa plantations had their own stories. The workers who lost jobs to automation had stories. The students who experienced the Hershey School's discipline had stories. Former residents of the company town who watched it transform into a tourist destination had stories. These stories complicated the official narrative, made it harder to celebrate without acknowledging cost. The Hershey story is American in its contradictions. Genuine innovation alongside exploitation, real philanthropy alongside institutional self-preservation, progressive ideals alongside discriminatory practices. It's possible to acknowledge what Milton Hershey built while questioning what he excluded, to recognize the workers who received steady wages while remembering the workers who were beaten for striking, to appreciate the children educated at the school while hearing from those who experienced it as controlling. The chocolate empire persists. The trust manages billions. The school educates students. The company produces chocolate. Hershey, Pennsylvania exists as both town and brand. Tourists visit. Workers commute to jobs. Residents live lives shaped by decisions made a century ago by a man they never knew. The factory still stands on its hill. Smaller now, less central, but present. The smell of chocolate still drifts over parts of town on certain days. The streetlights are still shaped like Hershey kisses. The brand is everywhere, in streetscapes, in marketing, in the consciousness of anyone who's ever bought American chocolate. Milton Hershey believed he was building something permanent, a factory that would outlast him, a town that would thrive, a school that would help children forever. He succeeded in ways he couldn't have imagined. The trust he established is worth over $17 billion. The company generates billions in annual revenue. The school has educated thousands of students. By conventional measures, his legacy succeeded beyond almost any industrialist of his era. But permanence is complicated. The factory that seemed eternal employs a fraction of its peak workforce. The town that bore one man's vision is now shaped by forces he never anticipated. Global capitalism, tourism, economics, changing social values. The school operates in a world with different understanding of childhood, trauma, institutional care. The trust manages wealth and financial markets Milton Hershey barely understood. What remains is the chocolate. Americans still buy Hershey bars. still recognize the distinctive brown wrapper, still associate the brand with childhood. The taste hasn't changed much in over a century. That consistency is intentional, deliberate. The product that built an empire continues largely unchanged while everything around it transforms. There's something profound in that. The chocolate connects present to past. Each bar is produced through processes Milton Hershey would no longer recognize, in facilities he never saw, by workers whose relationship to the company differs entirely from the workers he knew. Yet the taste remains familiar, unchanged, a material link to a vanished world. But what was that world? A utopian experiment? A company town? An empire built on control disguised as benevolence? The answer depends on who's telling the story. For some, Milton Hershey represents American entrepreneurship at its finest. For others, he represents paternalism and the limits of private charity. Both are true, both incomplete. The Hershey Empire reveals what happens when one man's vision becomes institutionalized, when personal control becomes corporate structure, when benevolence becomes bureaucracy. Milton Hershey could make decisions based on intuition, whim, values. The trust that succeeded him makes decisions based on fiduciary duty, legal obligations, institutional preservation. The humanity, for better and worse, drains away. Walking through Hershey, Pennsylvania today feels like walking through someone else's dream. The streets are clean, the buildings maintained. Everything is chocolate-themed to the point of surreality. Streetlights shaped like kisses. Avenue names like chocolate and cocoa. It's charming and slightly unsettling. A place that exists as both itself and its own advertisement. The residents live with this, navigate the strange reality of inhabiting a brand. Their home is also a tourist destination, a corporate asset, a historical site. The layering of identities creates complexity, pride in the town's uniqueness mixed with frustration at its commodification, appreciation for Milton Hershey's legacy mixed with resentment of continued trust control. The factory whistle no longer signals shift changes. Most production happens too far away to hear, but the rhythms persist. The town still pulses with economic forces it doesn't fully control. Decisions made in boardrooms determine employment. Market forces determine property values. The trust's financial management determines resources. Local autonomy is limited. Always has been. This was Milton Hershey's design. A planned community. Total integration of business and town. It provided stability for decades, also prevented independence. The town and company were so intertwined that separating them became impossible. Even now, with production diminished and employment reduced, Hershey, Pennsylvania can't imagine itself without the company. Its identity is inseparable. The school Milton Hershey built continues to grapple with its mission. Helping children in poverty while possessing enormous wealth creates inherent tension. The school can't spend billions on 2,000 students without waste, but expanding serves more children while diluting individual resources. The trust maintains that focused impact matters more than broad reach. Critics argue that billions should help more than 2,000 children. There's no easy answer. Milton Hershey created the trust with specific instructions. Courts generally defer to donor intent. The trust follows the founder's vision as they interpret it. But vision established in 1918 may not address needs in 2026. The world changed, poverty changed, understanding of child welfare changed, institutional care fell out of favor, yet the school continues operating on century-old principles. The students themselves navigate this legacy daily. They receive free education, live in comfortable homes on a beautiful campus, have opportunities many children in poverty never access. They also live under institutional rules, away from families, subject to policies they didn't choose. Some thrive, some struggle. Most experience complicated mixtures of gratitude and constraint. Former students tell divergent stories. Some credit the school with transforming their lives, providing education and opportunity they couldn't have gotten elsewhere. Others describe feeling controlled, isolated from families, forced into a model that didn't fit their needs. Both experiences are valid. Both reveal truths about institutional care and its limitations. The chocolate that pays for everything gets made far from these complications. Factories operate efficiently. Workers clock in and out. Machines run precisely. Chocolate flows through production lines in quantities that would have stunned Milton Hershey. The industrial processes he initiated reached scales he couldn't have imagined. But the cocoa still comes from the same places. West African farms, smallholder operations that have changed little in structure despite certification programs and sustainability initiatives. The fundamental economics remain exploitive. Farmers receive small fractions of chocolate's retail value. Their children still lack the opportunities American children take for granted. This is where Milton Hershey's vision breaks down completely. He could control his factory, his town, his school. He couldn't control global commodity chains, international trade, the systems that brought cocoa from tropical plantations to Pennsylvania processing facilities. Those systems existed before him and will exist after. Individual companies can make improvements at the margins, can't restructure the fundamentals. So the empire continues, producing chocolate, generating profit, funding a school, supporting a town, all while navigating contradictions that have no solutions, only balances, compromises, accepting some injustice to maintain some good. This is the real legacy, not the heroic narrative or the critical takedown. The messy reality of institutions that persist long past their founders. Night falls over Hershey, Pennsylvania. The streetlights, shaped like kisses, illuminate empty streets. The factory sits dark except for security lights. Hershey Park's roller coasters stand silent against the sky. The school's campus spreads across hills, students sleeping in cottages scattered among trees. The Trust's headquarters remain, documents and computers tracking billions in assets. Everything Milton Hershey built remains, transformed but present. The question isn't whether his legacy endures. The question is what that legacy means, who it serves, who it excludes, what it reveals about American capitalism, philanthropy, power. The chocolate empire is monument and warning, success story and cautionary tale, gift and burden. The taste of Hershey chocolate carries all of this. History compressed into sweetness. Labor and machinery and global trade and childhood and loss and profit. Each bar contains more than ingredients, contains decisions, consequences, the weight of empire reduced to something that melts on the tongue.